Welcome to episode 3 of Nudges and Bridges. Today we're doing the Sporting Life Part 2. And actually, you're going to see that over the next few episodes, I'm going to be talking or focusing on sports. One, because it's an easy entry point into these ideas of how to create bridges through a cultural artifact. But also, I want to build this notion of cultural artifacts through several examples. And then after 6 or 7 of these, I have a model that I want to present to you of how cultural artifacts help us make better decisions. And that's based on a psychological model, and also how within those decisions, we can then find the common ground. Right now, I'm interested in just telling the stories, but the stories are being told for a reason. One, I think they're cool stories, and I think that you will too, but also because I want to provide storytelling as a way to then explain the model, as opposed to starting off with an academic exercise of here's a model that frankly isn't very exciting, but then to be able to refer back to the examples that I provided to you in the earlier podcasts. So today, again, we're looking at sports as a way to provide bridges for people who may otherwise disagree with each other on social and political issues. Again, with the idea that people don't forget what their beliefs are on those social and political issues, but rather than that, the cultural artifact of sports allows us to find common ground and humanize the other people that otherwise we might be in disagreement with. And if we humanize them, if we have something in common with them, we can at least have the greater opportunity for a civil conversation and to actually sit and listen to each other a little bit, rather than just characterize the other person as an enemy or a stranger that we don't have anything to do with or want anything to do with. Today, I'm going to be looking at issues of sportsmanship. And I have 2 examples that are somewhat famous. They've gotten a lot of publicity anyway, so you may be familiar with them. Both occur on the baseball diamond or softball diamond. And as an old baseball player myself, maybe that's one of the reasons that I resonate with them so much. The first one came about in 2008, a women's softball game in the Pacific Northwest. This won an ESPY Award, so you probably heard about it. There was a young woman named Sarah Tukalski who was at bat, and she hit the ball over the fence. A home run, right? So, but in order to actually score the run, one has to circle the bases, touch all the bases, and score home, touch home plate. Otherwise, it doesn't count as a run. Well, Sarah was hit the ball over the fence and is circling the bases. And as she goes around first base, she falls and tears a ligament in her knee. She's in significant pain and unable to continue to go around the bases. She and her teammates asked the umpire, well, can we help her around the bases? I mean, she's hurt. She has to touch all of them in order to score the run. The umpire says, no, there's actually a rule against that. You cannot assist the teammates. And if anybody helps, then she's automatically out. So no, you can't assist her. Whereupon one of the players from the other team said, can I help? And the umpire thought about it and said, there's not a rule against that. And so the other team picked her up on their shoulders and carried her around the bases, and she touched each one of the bags and then home plate and officially scored the run. This is an example of the opposing team reaching out to help an opponent do something that was harmful to their team. They didn't have to do it. It's a run against the other team. Both teams are competing for a spot in a tournament. And so all the incentives of the game are for them to not do anything. But they thought that there was more to sports than that. And as a matter of fact, other people agree with that. I have taught a program over the years for current and former NFL football players. I've taught about 100 of them or so. And I've asked them, as I ask many of my students, to tell me a story about something that they thought was good, and then we'll explain why. And I had an all-pro lineman write about this story, and when he handed in the paper, he had tears in his eyes. He said, this is what sports are about. Not just the winning and the losing and who ends up being the championship, but this component of sportsmanship. Even when you're rivals, of playing together on the field and to be able to reach across and help another player in a situation like that. So that's one example, that even though you may be rivals, that you share something together of being on the field together. And to watch that event, to watch a replay of it, or even to hear the story, does something to us that no matter what your political persuasion is, you probably find a lot of value in it. Well, okay, it's fine to value other players. I mean, we can kind of respect other players, but how about an umpire? I mean, can we ever respect an umpire? Aren't they always the people that we make jokes of, or we yell and scream at, or get red in the face and yell at, or kick dirt at? I mean, they're the examples of umpires and referees too being abused are legion. Well, if there was an umpire that might have deserved it, it had happened back in 2010 when Armando Galarraga from the Detroit Tigers pitched what would have been at the time only the 21st perfect game in Major League history. Now, there's a lot of games in Major League history, and to throw a no-hitter is one thing, but a perfect game is a rare, rare gem. And Galarraga was brilliant that day. He retired the first 26 batters, and the 27th batter was up and hit a ground ball. Galarraga covered first base when the throw was made, and the runner was clearly out for Galarraga to record that 21st in Major League history perfect game. Except the umpire, Tim Joyce, called him safe. Now, this is before instant replay, and undoubtedly, if instant replay were in existence, this would not have happened, because the replay clearly showed that the runner was safe, or was out, sorry, and Galarraga would have his perfect game. But Joyce called him safe and ruined the perfect game. So, I mean, immediately Galarraga, first of all, he didn't kick dirt on the umpire or go yelling and screaming in his face. He was unhappy. He had kind of a wry, wicked smile on his face, but he went back to the mound and got the next guy out. So he ended up, getting a no-hitter out of it. But at the same time, it was wrong. It was a wrong call. And then it falls upon Joyce, who is a very respected umpire, who admits that he was wrong. How many times have you ever seen an umpire admit that they were wrong? Very tearfully so. He said, I blew it. I cost that kid a perfect game. I just blew it. I thought I made the right call, but I watched the replay. I was just clearly wrong. And Galarraga says, hey, it's okay. No one's perfect. It's okay. And the next day, his manager, Jim Leland, sends Galarraga out to home plate with the batting lineup. Joyce is the home plate umpire that day, receiving the lineup, and they exchange a pat and a hug, and the crowd is cheering them. Both people handled it beautifully. Yeah, there was something wrong, and the umpire apologized for it. And the pitcher who had the perfect game taken away from him accepted it. They later wrote a book together. Now, does that mean that they give up their positions? Actually, Joyce gave up his position. He said it was wrong. But Galarraga said, still thinks that Major League Baseball ought to give him credit for the perfect game, and I don't blame him for that. So it's not that he pulled back and said, no, I'm not, my forgiveness doesn't mean that I believe that I am right. But he saw something bigger that was going on, something bigger of sportsmanship vis-a-vis him and the umpire. And so sometimes it's called the almost perfect game. Sometimes it's called the extra perfect game, because while it wasn't recorded as a perfect game, at least not yet, it was extra perfect because of just how everybody handled it. And so here are two examples of the ways in which sports, if you're watching either one of those, if you are hearing the stories of one of those, you realize that there's something bigger about sports that brings us together, regardless of who hit the home run, who won the game, who got a perfect game and who didn't. There's something bigger than that. And observing that, thinking about that, reveals something that we have in common that we value, even in the midst of some of our differences.